Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really trying to pull back the curtain on a country that, well, can feel incredibly difficult to see into, Eritrea. And specifically, we're focusing on the man who's led it pretty much since independence, President Isaias Afwerki. We've gathered, a whole stack of sources, reports, articles, interviews, research notes, all trying to shed some light on his rule, what life is actually like inside the country, how far his authority reaches, even beyond its borders, and what experts make of it all.
That's right. And our mission for this deep dive really is to help you navigate this complex, often quite hidden reality. We want to unpack the journey of someone once seen as a liberation hero.
Right.
And understand how he transformed into, well, an absolute authoritarian ruler and what that actually means for the people of Eritrea and, the wider Horn of Africa.
It really all begins with the enigma of Afwerki himself, doesn't it? I mean, he was the leader of the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, the EPLF, which fought for, 30 years to gain independence from Ethiopia. They finally achieved victory in 1991.
A huge moment.
Huge. Then he was elected president in 1993. And he is still in power today.
And here's where the puzzle pieces, really start to challenge you. Because despite the country drafting and ratifying a constitution way back in 1997.
Yeah, I remember that.
It has simply never been implemented. It just sits there. There haven't been any national elections. Instead, he rules by decree, just absolute power.
Wow.
And sources highlight something really fascinating here. He apparently deliberately dismantled internal party structures within the EPLF, which later became the PFDJ in '94, specifically to make sure his authority couldn't be challenged. No internal opposition allowed.
So this move, consolidating power like that, and then layering on this narrative of being constantly on a, quote, war footing with Ethiopia.
Right, and that's how the sources put it.
That becomes the justification, basically, for indefinitely suspending civil liberties and stopping any democratic progress.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's this really striking contrast, isn't it? The promise of liberation after such a long struggle versus the reality of absolute, totally unchecked rule. That really defines the Eritrean story we're digging into today.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's peel back some more layers. Let's talk about the climate of fear inside the country.
Yeah, when you dig into the sources, one core characteristic just keeps coming up. A pervasive culture of fear and absolute obedience. And this isn't just, about keeping the general population in line. Reports indicate this fear goes right up into the state media outlets. People working there apparently live in constant dread of arbitrary arrest.
Wow.
And without the Constitution in place, there's no functioning legal system, right?
Yeah.
No institutional safeguards. Essentially, there's nothing to protect individuals from the state's power.
And probably the biggest mechanism for enforcing this fear, this control, is the system of indefinite national service.
Oh, absolutely central.
The law technically says it should be 18 months, but it's been indefinite since, a state of emergency in 1998?
That's right. Since '98. People serve for years, sometimes decades, often with little or no pay.
Decades.
Yes. The sources are quite clear. This is widely described as forced labor. Some even call it slavery. It provides the regime with this massive, basically free labor force for all sorts of state and military-owned businesses.
Right, so it's economic too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But beyond the labor, national service is also a critical tool for indoctrination. It regiments the youth, keeps them busy, prevents them from organizing or becoming a source of unrest.
Okay.
And it also instills what sources call a defensive attitude, glorifying national sovereignty, emphasizing self-reliance, and framing the outside world, especially old enemies, as this constant threat.
And the impact on education must be huge.
Devastating. Students are sent to the Sawa military camp for their final year of secondary school. So it effectively pushes them straight into this indefinite service.
We read some accounts that really bring this home. There was a 14-year-old Regat, fled because they were afraid of being rounded up and taken, even before they were technically old enough.
Yeah, heartbreaking.
And Sarim, who apparently endured 20 years of national service, just summed it up bluntly. Slavery.
It's stark. And this whole system is maintained because legal rights have been systematically dismantled. Arrests are arbitrary. Often happen without warrants, without charges.
Just taken away.
Exactly. People are held in prolonged detention. They never see a judge. They don't get a trial. No access to lawyers. And then there's this terrifying tactic, enforced disappearance.
That sounds awful.
It is.
Yeah.
Perceived dissidents, journalists, religious leaders, they just vanish.
Yeah.
Held incommunicado for years, sometimes decades,
Yeah.
in secret locations.
Yeah.
And, Many are believed to have died in custody.
Just think about the G15. Those were, what, 11 senior government officials who openly challenged Afwerki back in 2001. Their fate and the fate of 10 independent journalists arrested at the same time. It's still unknown. Over 20 years later, their families have zero information.
It's unimaginable.
And more recently, the former finance minister, Berhane Berhe, he died in jail just this past August 2024. Held incommunicado since 2018 just for writing a book calling for reform.
And the case of Siham Ali Abdu, arrested when she was just 15, she's now been held for 11 years.
15. Imagine the agony for those families. No contact, no news, nothing.
And the conditions inside these prisons, based on first-hand accounts, are just horrific. Michael, a former detainee, described Adiabedo prison. Thousands of men packed into just 4 large rooms.
Packed in.
He said many prisoners literally lost their minds from the overcrowding and the conditions. And Desta, a former guard who actually managed to secretly film inside, confirmed the overcrowding and described brutal torture methods, including one they called church, where victims are suspended by their bound limbs, causes immense pain, dislocates joints.
That's barbaric.
Then Tesfaye recounted an underground cell known as the Oven at Wea Camp, a metal container buried in the ground. He said a fellow prisoner actually died from the extreme heat inside it.
Died from heat.
And we have Dr. Solomon, a medical professional who treated inmates with severe trauma fractures, loss of consciousness from repeated torture. This deliberate lack of transparency around detentions in prisons, it's not an accident. It's a tactic.
Designed to terrorize.
Exactly. Terrorizes entire families, communities. And it makes any kind of accountability for these abuses virtually impossible.
So, faced with this reality, it's no wonder many try to flee. But leaving the country without an exit visa is illegal, right? And incredibly dangerous.
Extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
There's a documented shoot-to-kill policy at the borders.
Shoot to kill.
Yeah. And the journey itself is just filled with peril. People have to navigate minefields, face desert gangs, risk dehydration, potential detention in places like Libya or Israel, and then the treacherous Mediterranean crossing.
We read about Thomas, a 12-year-old boy. He described navigating landmines, but said he feared the soldiers more than the mines.
Think about that. A 12-year-old. And the UN Special Rapporteur, Dr. Babaker, he specifically highlighted alarming reports of Eritrean refugees being kidnapped, tortured, subjected to sexual violence, especially in places like Libya.
It just underscores the extreme desperation driving people to take these risks. And the dangers don't even end if they manage to cross the border.
Not at all. And the regime also uses collective punishment against families of people who evade the draft or desert, which is illegal under international law, by the way.
How does that work?
Well, they might evict older relatives or women with young children from their homes, cut off their food rations, arbitrarily detain family members, seal off homes, confiscate cattle. It's a brutal way to enforce compliance by hitting people where it hurts most of their families back home.
And this control extends even to religious freedom, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. Only 4 denominations are officially recognized. That's Sunni Islam, the Eritrean Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Evangelical Church of Eritrea, which includes Lutherans.
And everyone else.
Followers of any other faiths face arrest, imprisonment, and even leaders within the recognized faiths aren't safe. Catholic priests, Orthodox monks, they've been arbitrarily detained too.
It's across the board then.
Pretty much. Jehovah's Witnesses face particularly harsh treatment. Their citizenship has actually been revoked. They're imprisoned indefinitely, without trial, purely for conscientious objection to national service.
Revoked citizenship just for their beliefs.
Yeah. And sources mention conscripts being prevented from practicing their religion, police conducting intrusive door-to-door searches, looking for any evidence of prohibited religious activity.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty grim picture of the climate of fear and control inside the country. How does a regime maintain this level of control? How do they shape how people see the world? A key part must be information control.
Absolutely crucial. It's often said Eritrea is one of the most censored countries globally. You hear comparisons to North Korea. Groups like the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ, rank it right at the bottom.
And the sources confirm a complete state monopoly on all news outlets?
Total monopoly. That brutal crackdown back in 2001 wasn't just on political dissent. It specifically wiped out the last remaining private media. Those journalists were jailed. Many are still held without trial today.
Still held.
Which makes Eritrea one of Africa's worst jailers of journalists. And the fear runs so deep, as we mentioned, that even state media reporters live in constant dread of arrest.
And no international reporters allowed in.
The last accredited international reporter was kicked out way back in 2007.
Wow. So it's completely closed off.
It creates what basically amounts to a digital iron curtain. The single state-run telecom company, Eritrea, has complete control over everything, all mobile communications, all internet access.
Yeah, the internet access is
severely limited, mostly slow dial-up connections. Less than 1% of the population is actually online.
Less than 1%. And I read something interesting. Mobile internet plans were actually scrapped back in 2011.
Yeah, that's right. And sources suggest this was explicitly because the government feared the influence of the Arab Spring. They didn't want independent information getting around easily.
So they just cut it off.
Yep. Consequently, Eritrea has one of the lowest cell phone usage rates in the world. And even the independent media run by Eritreans in exile, trying to broadcast radio or provide online news, they face constant signal jamming, online blocking, all orchestrated by Eritrea. It drastically limits their reach inside the country.
So this isn't just about blocking certain facts, is it? It's more strategic than that.
Exactly. It's designed to shape consciousness, to prevent any alternative viewpoints from taking root. By controlling everything people see and hear, reinforcing that specific narrative through state media, through the national service indoctrination, they create this information echo chamber.
Constantly reinforcing the message.
Right. Constantly reinforcing that defensive attitude, glorifying national sovereignty above everything, painting the outside world as hostile, and any critical voices get framed as part of a regime change agenda, spreading ill content and lies.
But even behind an iron curtain, sometimes there are cracks. Our sources mentioned Eritrean Press, a Facebook page. Apparently, it's become a rare source of independent information.
Yeah, that's an interesting case. It has over 250,000 followers. Though because of the internet restrictions, maybe only around 30,000 are actually accessing it from inside Eritrea.
Still, that's something.
It is. It was founded by someone known only as Jay. And initially, apparently, he was supportive of the government's foreign policy, but kept some independence by allowing criticism of domestic stuff.
And then something shifted.
Well, what's insightful is that after the 2018 peace deal with Ethiopia, Jay reportedly felt that the thawing relations, quote, freed him up. He started allowing more direct criticism of domestic issues, even allegations of nepotism in the government.
Interesting timing.
But ultimately, this case kind of proves the point about the digital iron curtain, doesn't it? Even when some independent information does exist, its ability to reach most people inside Eritrea is severely limited by the government's stranglehold on the infrastructure.
Right. It shows how effective that control is. So, okay, we've looked at the control inside the country, but it's clear Afwerki's influence, the regime's reach, it doesn't stop at Eritrea's borders. Sources talk about this iron grip extending abroad through transnational repression.
Absolutely. And this is a really crucial part of how the regime survives. One tool is that controversial 2% income tax they expect from the diaspora.
So 2% tax, right?
While maybe its financial contribution is less now, it's often required if diaspora members want essential services from embassies, like getting ID cards, travel documents. And sources say it's often collected using coercive measures.
What happens if you refuse?
Refusing can basically flag you as an opponent. They can deny you those services. Sometimes people are even required to write a humiliating letter of apology.
Wow. And chillingly, they use family ties, right? Collective punishment of relatives back home.
Yes, that's a key method of controlling the diaspora. If someone abroad is seen as being against the regime, their family members still in Eritrea can face prison, fines, having their property or business licenses seized. It's a brutal way to enforce compliance by hitting people's deepest connections.
Exploiting their love for their family.
Exactly. And the regime also uses systematic intimidation tactics abroad. Sources describe how diaspora communities are subtly infiltrated by agents of the state. Embassies actively recruit spies.
Spies in the diaspora.
Yes. And individuals who promote human rights or criticize the regime abroad face what's called systematic intimidation. This can range from online abuse and harassment by state-linked trolls.
Trolls, yeah.
To emails, fully fledged death threats, smear campaigns, defamation, and even more recently, actual physical assaults. It's all designed to create fear and silence dissent, even in countries where people thought they'd found safety.
Despite all that, though, many Eritreans abroad are incredibly politically active. And there's this significant recent development, the rise of the Blue Revolution, right? Also known as brigade and how I do.
Yeah, that's a big shift. It's a youth-led movement, mostly recent refugees and second-generation Eritreans.
And what are they targeting?
Their main focus is the regime's cultural festivals held abroad. They see these not just as cultural events, but as crucial fronts for fundraising, political propaganda, and extending that transnational repression.
So hitting the money and the message.
Exactly. Their goal is to cut off these financial lifelines and expose the potentially illegal activities of regime loyalists who might be exploiting their host countries. And after years of trying peaceful methods, they've shifted to more confrontational tactics, which unfortunately has led to violent clashes at some events, like in Gießen, Germany, and in Israel.
And their symbol, the blue flag, that's significant too.
Very symbolic. It was the original flag of autonomous Eritrea from 1952 to 1961. Waving it is a direct rejection of the current non-elected dictatorship under the PFDJ flag. It's advocating for a return to parliamentary democracy.
But this activism must come with huge risks.
Immense risks. The sources really underscore this. The threats and abuse aren't just online noise. They can directly target family members still inside Eritrea. Remember Michael, who secretly filmed inside the prison. He lived in constant fear of revenge against his family back home.
It takes incredible courage.
It really does. But something critical seems to have shifted lately. The worsening repression inside Eritrea, especially that intensified conscription during the Tigray War, and more property confiscation targeting families, it seems to have pushed many younger Eritreans abroad past a breaking point.
A tipping point.
Kind of. There's this growing feeling among the youth that, quote, the worst things are happening to their families at home, and what is worse than that could happen to them in the diaspora.
Like they have less to lose now.
Exactly. That desperation is fueling the Blue Revolution. And sources also note that women activists and organizers are playing an increasingly important role in it.
So it's this strange paradox, isn't it? The regime tries to control the diaspora with repression, but the internal repression gets so bad it actually pushes the diaspora to fight back harder, despite the risks.
It's a fascinating dynamic. The strategy might be backfiring in some ways, spurring more determined activism.
Okay, to help us put all this into context, let's bring in some expert perspectives from the sources we looked at. The UN Special Rapporteur, Mohammed Abdel-Salam Babakar, consistently paints a grim picture. He stated the human rights situation remained dire, with patterns of gross human rights violations just continuing.
And a major challenge Babakar points to, which really hinders international understanding and monitoring, is Eritrea's persistent refusal to cooperate. They won't work with UN or regional human rights mechanisms. They deny access to the special rapporteur himself,
making independent verification almost impossible.
Extremely difficult. And Babakar has also documented really grave atrocities committed by Eritrean defense forces during the Tigray conflict in Ethiopia. Things like massacres, extrajudicial killings, widespread sexual violence, and specifically targeting refugee populations.
Horrific. We also heard from Salih Saba, an Eritrean opposition leader and analyst. He gives a really stark assessment of Afwerki's survival strategy.
Yeah, his quote was quite blunt. He said Afwerki is going to continue to say that even for the next 10 years, he and his groups, the gangs, they have the good benefit. The people are starving. They have the good opportunity to have everything. He and his groups are living good, but the population, the Eritrean people, are suffering.
So basically, the regime serves a small elite.
That's his assessment. And Saba also notes Afwerki's very pragmatic, almost opportunistic foreign policy. He's constantly seeking new allies. He maintains past ties with Israel, recently cultivated a good friend relationship with Iran, reportedly for access to gas and petrol.
Interesting. Iran.
And possibly looking for partnerships with countries like Korea or other African nations.
Yeah.
It's all driven by one goal, keeping the regime afloat, adapting alliances as needed.
Then there's Martin Plaut, author of Understanding Eritrea. He echoes a lot of this, right? Calling Eritrea Africa's most repressive state.
He does. And he argues a claim is supported by the UN itself, classifying the country as totalitarian.
And Plaut connects the repression to Ethiopia.
Yes. He argues the intense repression isn't just random cruelty. It's heavily shaped by those ongoing, unresolved issues with Ethiopia. It allows the regime to maintain that war-footing narrative to justify the tight internal control.
Makes sense.
His research also suggests these foreign ties aren't just political window dressing. They actually enable regime elites to acquire wealth and provide crucial economic support through a kind of covert economy, bypassing official channels.
A covert economy.
Yeah. And Plaut also makes the point that some EU and Western countries might inadvertently be enabling this repression by, well, failing to hold Eritrea to higher human rights standards in their dealings.
So these expert views help tie it all together. You see this kind of symbiotic relationship. Extreme internal control justified by external threats, while external alliances and maybe a hidden economy provide the means for the elites to benefit and keep that internal grip.
Exactly. It connects the dots between the internal reality and the external strategies.
Okay, bringing all of this together then, what does it suggest about where Eritrea might be headed? What's the future trajectory look like?
Well, the prevailing analysis, unfortunately, suggests Afwerki will likely cling to power until the bitter end, which probably means until his death.
Because there's no way to remove him.
Effectively, no. As you've said, no elections. The military's been systematically purged and controlled to prevent any challenge from there, and the country's run entirely by decree because that constitution just isn't in force.
Right. And there's that concerning observation from sources, too, that the mindset of the ordinary Eritrean may match the current president's worldview.
Yeah, that's a really worrying potential long-term consequence of the universal conscription and decades of state indoctrination, creating this deep-seated defensive attitude, this ingrained suspicion of the outside world.
And analysts warn that because of this shaped mindset, even if change were to come somehow, neither immediate change nor gradual reform would be easy. It could have significant, maybe even grave consequences.
It's a complex legacy.
Definitely. And Eritrea's actions, its unresolved issues, they clearly contribute significantly to instability across the Horn of Africa. That 2018 peace deal with Ethiopia, the one that won the Nobel Peace Prize, it remains pretty fragile, doesn't it?
Very fragile. And Eritrea's deliberate exclusion from the 2022 Pretoria Agreement, which ended the main fighting in Tigray, really highlights those ongoing tensions. Eritrea sees the TPLF, the dominant force in Tigray, as this persistent national security threat. That's why they intervene militarily in the conflict.
And there are accusations of Eritrea stirring the pot elsewhere, supporting factions, economic exploitation.
Yes, accusations of supporting various factions in the region, engaging in things like alleged gold smuggling, possibly to fund groups, or just provide revenue while under international sanctions. These unresolved tensions, Ethiopia's ambition for Red Sea access clashing with Eritrea's deep mistrust of foreign powers and its focus on self-reliance, it all creates a really volatile dynamic.
In a region that's already
Characterized by authoritarian regimes, competition for dominance, fragmentation, civil wars.
Yeah. So if conflict flared up again in Tigray, for example, the risks are huge.
Immense. You're talking about further displacement, bigger migration flows, humanitarian crises, drawn-out wars, and in a region where global superpowers are increasingly getting involved in proxy conflicts.
Yeah, the stakes are incredibly high. However, it's important, you said, sources also present an alternative perspective on Eritrea's regional role.
That's right, we should acknowledge that. Some argue Eritrea actually plays a more positive diplomatic role sometimes, precisely because it has relative domestic stability compared to its neighbors.
What are the examples?
They point to things like Eritrea hosting a trilateral meeting with Somalia and Egypt just recently, October 2024, and providing training to the Somali army.
Okay.
So this view suggests that maybe some Western policies like sanctions or explicit calls for regime change might actually be counterproductive, that they could potentially worsen instability, increase refugee flows, and just push Eritrea closer to non-Western powers like Russia or China. Both these perspectives are out there in the analysis.
Okay, that was definitely a deep dive into a very complex, often opaque reality. So, just to quickly recap what we covered, we explored Isaias Afwerki's journey, really, from liberation hero to absolute ruler, a rule built on these layers of fear and pervasive control.
We looked at the mechanisms that indefinite national service, the horrific prison conditions, the dangers people face just trying to flee, and the use of collective punishment against families.
We also examined that digital iron curtain, the state's total grip on information to shape the narrative, while also noting those maybe small but significant cracks like Eritrean press.
And we discussed how the regime's long arm reaches right into the diaspora, through things like the 2% tax and intimidation. But critically, how this seems to have paradoxically fueled a new, more determined wave of activism, the Blue Revolution.
Right. And finally, we heard from experts who gave us crucial context, linking that dire human rights situation to Afwerki's political survival strategies, that connection between internal control and external alliances, and how it all feeds into the instability of the region.
That's a lot to take in.
It really is. So why does this situation matter to you, listening right now?
Well, it's crucial because the reality in Eritrea isn't just some isolated internal problem. It's a major humanitarian crisis. It fuels a mass exodus, putting immense strain on neighboring countries and international asylum systems.
And it's also a significant contributor to regional instability in a really important geopolitical hotspot. You've got opaque governance, interventions in conflicts, shifting alliances, and that ever-present risk of renewed war.
So what should you keep an eye on going forward? Well, definitely watch the trajectory of the Blue Revolution and other diaspora movements. Their strategies are evolving, and they could potentially challenge the regime's external legitimacy and maybe even some of those crucial financial lifelines.
Also, monitor how the international community responds or doesn't respond to Eritrea's documented human rights abuses and its continued refusal to cooperate with UN monitoring.
And keep a close eye on those shifting regional power dynamics. Ethiopia's ambitions, the ongoing instability in Sudan and Somalia. All these factors will continue to heavily influence Eritrea's internal situation and its external relations.
Definitely interconnected.
Absolutely. And if you want to dig even deeper into this, the sources we drew from point to some really valuable resources. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, and Human Rights Watch, they publish extensive reports on Eritrea's human rights situation.
That's starting points.
Yeah. Martin Platt's book, Understanding Eritrea, Inside Africa's Most Repressive State, offers really good in-depth historical and political context. And if you're looking for alternative perspectives, the kind often suppressed inside the country, look for independent Eritrean media outlets like Await.com, Set It, and Erisat. You can often find them via platforms like YouTube.
Great resources. So this deep dive into Eritrea under Afwerki, it really leaves us with a profound question to think about, doesn't it? In a state where the rule of law is basically non-existent, where fear is the main currency, information is totally controlled, and the leadership seems completely entrenched, where does the potential for real change actually lie? Is it sustained external pressure? Is it growing internal disillusionment despite the massive risks? Or is it primarily in the persistent, evolving efforts of those Eritreans who fled but refused to be silenced? Something for you to consider.